Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We begin, as we have done so often on this programme, although, to be fair, not for a while, with the enigma, the mystery, the conundrum that is Boris Johnson. I probably can't get away with just asking what you think he's playing at, can I? In fact, that's what I'd really like to do. I have a sort of relatively small pool of trusted contacts, some of whom I disagree with politically, some of whom I sort of sing from a similar hymn sheet with. As far as I can tell, and it's not a big pool, I mention that because there may well be people out there who have got a better angle on it, but as far as I can tell, nobody's quite sure what he's playing at now. Genuinely, even people that would sort of historically be perceived as his allies, not quite sure of the timing of this intervention on Friday, which we would have, of course, talked about then had it not been for the terrorist attack at Parsons Green, or precisely what it is he's trying to do. So I'll start with that, genuinely. I'd kind of love to hear what you think Boris Johnson is up to. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the second question is how does he continue to get away with it? I fell for it. He's very, very affable. It's weird that, because normally the sort of mask that you feel some slightly sinister politicians wear, it slips quite easily. I don't even feel comfortable now using the word sinister in the context of Boris Johnson, even though increasingly his relationship with the truth and reality does appear to be potentially dangerous. I fell for it because why did I fall for it? Why did you fall for it? Especially if you blow in the wind a bit politically, you prefer to base your votes, base your opinions upon issues and individuals rather than ancient loyalties, rather than tribal loyalties. You should theoretically, if you're my age, you should have been able to contemplate voting for all three of the major political parties over the course of the last, I've been allowed to vote for 27 years. So over the course of the last 27 years, you should theoretically have been able to contemplate voting for Nick Clegg's Liberal Democrats, perhaps, for the SDP, if you're a bit older than me. John Smith's Labour Party would have been very different if he'd fought a general election from Tony Blair's, but equally Neil Kinnock, so all sorts of people. John Major's Conservatives now look very different, of course, from Theresa May's. You look back to the Falklands invasion when Peter Carrington resigned as Foreign Secretary for failing to foresee the invasion. And that just feels like almost a different planet to the one we're inhabiting now. We've always put the boot into politicians. We've always slagged them off, but rarely has the landscape been so utterly devoid of integrity, or at least of depth, of what you describe as gravitas, of bottom. That applies, it seems to me, across the whole of the House of Commons. It's by no means confined to one side. Peter Carrington resigned as Foreign Secretary for failing to foresee the invasion of the Falklands Islands. The current incumbent is told off by an independent watchdog who has a statutory duty to protect the public from the misuse and manipulation of statistics, and he has to tick off the Foreign Secretary. That's one of the four great offices of state in this country. And today, the incumbent stands accused of, at best, being extremely economical with the truth and at worst, actually lying. That 350 million figure was disowned almost immediately after the referendum result came in. You'll remember many of the sort of key Brexiters were at great pains to say, no. It was never a promise. It was never a pledge. It was never anything other than a catchy slogan on the side of a bus. Some people denied that they'd had anything to do with it, and then somewhat inconveniently were found to have been photographed with the bus in the background. And Boris Johnson's latest intervention, I suppose it allows for a degree of nuance. He's desperately trying to wriggle off the hook that the head of the Statistics Authority has put him on. But it's also unseemly. It's all, forgive me, I don't normally employ this kind of language, but it's also very un-British, isn't it? It's this kind of, Well, their front page headline in the Telegraph on Friday was, Boris, yes, we will take back 350 million from EU for NHS. He's now claiming that because he didn't actually write the headline, it's unfair to claim that he somehow subscribes to that school of thought. And the idea that he wouldn't have known exactly what was happening to that front page is a little bit insulting. But then again, I guess not everybody is well versed in the vagaries of Fleet Street. I will begin with that. What do you think he's up to? Seriously, whether you love him or loathe him, because I don't want to close things down from the very beginning on the question of whether or not he's up to no good. If you really like him, what do you think he's up to? In fact, in many ways, if you still believe the Boris hype, I'd be more interested in what you think. Is that true? No, I'm equally interested, whether you love him or loathe him, or whether you're somehow ambivalent. What do you think he's up to? It makes very, very little sense. 0345 6060973. He has moved so much in the last year that it's almost impossible to remember where he stands on any given issue. Do you remember we were supposed to be telling the European Union that they could whistle for the money that they will seek to secure before they can even contemplate opening up a trade deal? Whether there's a legal obligation or not is moot. If you want to have a trade negotiation, then they will expect us to settle at least some of the responsibilities that we've previously signed up to. That's how it works. You know, you signed up for this, and this. The bills are still totting up. If you want to sign a trade deal after leaving the European Union, you're going to have to at least accept some of your responsibility for the totting up of these bills that you signed up to previously. Well, I hesitate to say these words now in the context of Brexit, but that is a fact. That is a matter of record. Foreign Secretary replies to the head of the Statistics Authority, somewhat remarkably, a 550-word letter accusing him of a complete misrepresentation of his claims about Brexit and urging him to withdraw the criticism. It's just nuts. It's so vain and unnecessary. I'm increasingly exasperated by this notion that we all need to be more positive about Brexit, and that somehow being concerned is, some people even suggest it's unpatriotic. That, if you really had to pin down in a single episode how mad we have become, all of us have become, that would be it, wouldn't it? You are telling people who worry that they are watching their country damage itself, you're telling them to shut up and not talk about it because patriotism demands that you stay silent when you think your country is damaging itself. This notion that positivity can somehow rescue us. It'd be beautiful if it was happening in another country. We could point and laugh. The idea is that as you head towards a cliff edge and you worry that you're about to plummet to the ground, if you flap your arms harder, flap, 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 the harder you flap, then the better off we will be when we actually reach the lip of the cliff, the crest of the cliff. But anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about Boris Johnson. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 606 0973. Theresa May due to make a big speech this week. I wonder if it's fair to say that German newspaper, it says the Conservative government, the British government, does not have an EU strategy. I hadn't actually thought of it like that. I get so bogged down in my fears of what we're doing, and my belief that we shouldn't be doing it, that I actually perhaps have lost sight of what it is they are actually doing. Is there an EU? Is there a strategy at the moment? If you've got a foreign secretary saying 1 week they should whistle for it, and another week, of course, there are obligations we have to meet. You've got a prime minister saying, very, very little. A Brexit secretary whose grasp of the detail is, at best, weak, and at worst, abysmal. International Trade Secretary who doesn't understand the most central tenets of international trade, or at least didn't when he was speaking a few months ago. Perhaps he's had a crash course now. That's really frightening, regardless of whether you leave or remain. There should be a huge issue of concern that we don't know what our strategy is. And when this was pointed out a few months ago, the argument, I think, was, we must keep our cards close to our chest, wasn't it? That you wouldn't tell the other side what your negotiating strategy is. And I suppose you could derive some comfort from that, could you? We shouldn't tell the other side when do you tell the other side what your negotiating strategy is? When do you tell the other side what your red lines are, what you will and won't accept? When do you acknowledge the fact that they've published theirs in full online and we still don't know what ours is? So listen, let's not have a scrap today, at least not to start with. I thought we were going to be talking about Boris Johnson, but we've dived in on the bigger Brexit issues, haven't we? Which would you prefer? Boris or Brexit or both? All the Bs on the programme this morning. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Give me a call now if you can tell me... Yeah, let's start with that. What you think Boris Johnson's up to. 0345 6060 973. That's possibly the question I thought I was going to be most interested in. What is he up to? 0345 6060 973. I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit I haven't got a clue. I can't come up with a kind of theory or a scheme. Then the bigger Brexit question, which is, what is our strategy? Does anybody actually know? And I guess you'd have to be either still leave or voted leave to be able to answer that question. Why aren't we more worried that we don't know what we're trying to get? Let that hang for a while. It doesn't matter what side of the referendum you were on or what side of the argument you were on. You've got a foreign secretary at odds with the Prime Minister now. They're both ostensibly on the same team. So what is our strategy? Do you know? I don't think you do. But I don't really want to spend an hour proving it by not getting any phone calls. So if you think you've got an answer, give us a buzz now. 0345 6060 973. What is our strategy and what is our Foreign Secretary playing at? I'm slightly scared, actually, about the complete absence of answers. Normally when I set the programme up at 10 o'clock in the morning, I throw out the questions, and as I throw the questions out to you, I begin to sort of form my own answers. I usually expect something to appear on the horizon, something to, whether it's right or wrong, at least it's something you can hang your hat on, a hook, sort of extends itself out of my contemplations. But I have not got a Scooby-Doo. What is Boris Johnson up to, and what is the United Kingdom's negotiating strategy as the clock ticks ever louder? It's 10:16. It's not even controversial to call him a liar, is it? It's remarkable, really, that a party that sort of supposedly thrives on family values and all of those sort of old-fashioned traditions has this ongoing love affair with a man that defies all of those presumptions. He's got a love child running around West London. He's sort of cheated on both of his wives. He's legendarily incapable of keeping his trousers on. Now, you can perfectly well argue that doesn't matter, but you can't really argue that doesn't matter well with any other politician. You'd think that family values were important. So we will do the Boris question, and we'll also do the bigger Brexit question, but we'll begin with, what do you think he's up to? What's actually going on? Stephen's in Marlborough. Stephen, what's he up to now?
Morning, James.
Hello, Stephen.
I think if we go back 18 months to before he declared his position on Brexit, he was actually just considered to be almost an affable buffoon of a politician. Nobody really took him seriously. He'd been mayor of London, but he'd taken over from
Ken Livingstone.
From Ken Livingstone, so he didn't have much to beat there. And then, almost at the last minute, he came out in favour of Brexit, and to me, that proved that he's not really committed to it. I think he saw that this. Well,
he did famously write two articles that day. One that would come down in favour of leaving, and one that would come down in favour of remaining. That's part of my problem this morning. Really, is when I try to work out, and I'm a self-confessed victim. I fell for it. I voted for him in the election that you refer to, the mayoral election, when he first got in against Ken Livingstone. And I guess I'm confused by people who haven't seen the light, in a sense.
Okay, so I didn't live in London under his reign, if you want to give it that name. So I couldn't possibly comment. But no. You asked about what he's trying to do.
What's he up to now?
I think he's now deliberately destabilising the government. He's doing it just before conference, and I think he's jumping now on the back of Theresa May's lack of judgment in actually giving him a position of power. I don't think she should ever have done that.
Didn't she have to keep him close, sort of being out inside the tent? You know the metaphor, you know how it continues, weeing out rather than outside the tent weeing in.
Well, maybe, but it didn't have to be. It didn't have to be as foreign secretary. There was some other job that she could have given him.
But also, she gave the three big jobs to Fox, Davis, and Johnson, which kind of says, all right, you wanted this. you sort it out, and then as it becomes more and more evident that they can't, I don't know whether we're giving her too much credit for playing quite a Machiavellian game. So what happens next? This is quite an unfashionable way to conduct a voting, because I genuinely haven't got a dog in the race. I haven't got a clue what he's up to, but destabilising the government seems... Well, I suppose we can put it on the list. The problem is that his supporters are the ones that are accusing everybody else of being sort of unpatriotic, and we all have to pull together and we have to have positivity. So how do they go along with the destabilising process?
Well, James, I'm not too sure. I think that the long-term strategy for the country is that we've got to get the best, but actually nobody knows what the best is.
Well, no one knows whether or not it's in any way better than what we've already got, although, of course, that's the really anathema observation at the moment, which probably is what Theresa May believes.
So it was really interesting that, we had the 5th richest economy in the world, despite the European Union being a member.
Yes.
And I'm not, I wholly acknowledge that there are things wrong with Europe. However, the status quo was that we were the 5th richest economy on the planet. We're now 7th. Are we happy to be 10th or 12th or 15th for the next 5, 10, 15 years until we really see what the outcome is going to be?
Yes. Well, I think I'm going to keep it closer to Boris for the first part of the programme than I am to the bigger Brexit issues, for the very simple reason that we talk about Brexit an awful lot, and Boris Johnson is a key architect of Brexit. I mean, arguably by far the most important architect of the Leave vote. Just the succession of dishonesties and deceptions is quite bizarre, and yet people still buy it. So I think I'm in that lucky position of being able to say I am a former addict, as it were. I have the zeal of a convert, so I can't sit here and call you stupid if you're still falling for the Boris bluster, because I fell for it myself. I would like to know what it is you see that I don't, or what it is you can't see that I can. 0345 6060 973. And then as a politics watcher, which anyone listening to this programme will be, to varying degrees, what is he actually up to? 0345 6060 973. How does this play out? What is it supposed to achieve? How does it impact upon Theresa May? How does it impact upon the likelihood of securing some sort of deal in the coming days? And just to clarify, I haven't mentioned this until I'm blue in the face, but sometimes it takes a while for pennies to drop. I don't think, as to refer back to some of what Stephen just said, I don't think I was qualified to vote in that referendum. I've admitted that quite a few times recently. I know so much more now than I did before. Is Boris just appealing to the people now who refuse to learn, who just absolutely stick to their guns, regardless of how much evidence is presented, to suggest they might have got things wrong? Peter's in Bedale in North Yorkshire. Peter, what would you like to say?
I think this is Boris Johnson trying to put himself in a position where he either has to resign or get sacked from the government.
Why? Why does he want that to happen?
And I can guarantee you I am not wearing a tinfoil hat.
No, this makes sense. This makes sense. I mean, I don't need photographic evidence.
What I would describe as the Brer Rabbit strategy. He's actually doing as Foreign Secretary.
He's whatting as Foreign Secretary?
Sorry, he's as Foreign Secretary.
When again, I didn't hear the word. He's doing what as Foreign Secretary?
Sorry, he's struggling.
Struggling, right, carry on.
Yeah. Okay, and he has found being a minister very difficult. He's arguably not even the best minister in his own family, because Joe Johnson is doing his job really well.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is, he found himself...
Where have you gone now? Peter, you're speaking to 910,000 people. Could you just concentrate on keeping your mouthpiece next to your mouth, please?
Yes, sorry.
Carry on.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Right. So, from that point of view, he's found it difficult being Foreign Secretary. He's having to do that job whilst not dealing with the most significant foreign policy issue that's facing us. He has found himself in the situation where he's locked into cabinet responsibility which he doesn't like.
But he's thrown that back in the Prime Minister's face this weekend, hasn't he? This notion of collective cabinet responsibility. He's made a mockery of that, and in a sense he's made a mockery of individual ministerial responsibility as well by flip-flopping so much. How does he gain? I think I see your long-term suggestion. He wants to be the king across the water, and he can't do that if he's Foreign Secretary. Possibly that was part of Theresa May's reasoning when she appointed him. But he's not going to resign, it would... unless... So if he either resigns or gets sacked, then he becomes the alternative court. Then he becomes the leader in waiting, as it were.
He's able to go back to speaking to audiences at conferences and around the country, and people having to listen, will be listening to him, and he will be nice old affable Boris again, rather than somebody who's actually not a very good foreign secretary.
And he's at his best when he has actually either little meaningful power, or which you could argue the Mayor of London fulfills that role, or when he is sort of allowed carte blanche to bluster and bloviate and amuse and delight to varying degrees. I think perhaps you underestimate the scale of his ambition. The one thing on which everybody agrees, friends, foes, allies, enemies, within the party and without, all agree that his ambition is immense, absolutely immense, and that would somehow not be fulfilled by returning to a position as a sort of nation's favourite jester. He's a fascinating character. We're very lucky sometimes to have a degree of objectivity. I can't quite imagine what it would be like to think, well, I must like him because he's a Conservative, or I must dislike him because he's a Conservative. If like the majority of the country, you can move according to the evidence, you can change your mind when the facts change. He is by far the most interesting politician of his generation, but interesting is not necessarily a good thing. In fact, I guess the last 2 years have taught us all why, when the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times, they mean it as a curse. It's 10:30. Can probably add this to the long list of predictions I've made in recent years, which I wish hadn't come true. But it turns out that the so-called vigilantes who target paedophiles and do the job that many of us feel the police can't do due to cuts to resources and bodies are really enjoying an astonishing period of success. Half of child sex cases involve assistance from so-called paedophile hunters. Can you believe that? Police have used evidence provided by paedophile hunters in almost half of child sexual grooming cases, and this very much gets filed under one of those stories, one of those issues that I know I shouldn't feel the way I do about. But I think they do great work. We've met a few of them, and I bow to them. I really do. And yet, that word vigilante ordinarily would be something with very negative associations. We're going to talk about that later in the programme, and we're also, to sort of just carry on nodding towards Brexit, one of the few things that Project Fear predicted, it's another thing that's come true incidentally, but one of the few things it predicted that I thought might actually be the opposite of a reason to vote, to remain, a good reason to leave. If you're worried about access to property for particularly younger people in this country, the idea that house prices would come down as a result of Brexit was, to me, not actually a deterrent, even though, like most people with a property, it's by far the biggest investment I will ever make in my life, and part of me is terrified by the idea of it being worth less next year than it was last year. But in terms of the country, house prices coming down, I could see as being essentially quite a good thing. Well, they are coming down. The average house on the market now costs £3,600 less than it did last month. That's the first August to September fall in about 4 years. And we're going to talk later in the programme about what that means, especially with the context or the possibility of interest rate rises being just around the corner. I wonder how many of us are actually going to be in proper bother if we have to pay more for our mortgage than we do now, even a few quid more, a few £100 more, whatever it may be. We'll get onto that later in the programme. But for the time being, we stay with the Bs, Boris, Brexit or both. What do you think Boris is up to? 0345 6060 973. Quite a few people on social media are expressing surprise that I voted for him in the third, when Ken Livingstone was going for his third bid. I suspect you're not Londoners. I think if you were a Londoner, you'd understand how the sort of weather vane span a bit towards the end of Ken Livingstone's second tenure. Even before he lost the ability to open his mouth without mentioning Hitler, there were problems there. So I make no apology for voting for him, but I do think I, in retrospect, got sucked in by a very seductive exterior rather than a politician of bottom. I was sucked in by the image, and you know, he does this thing. So him and Nick always got on very well, but which meant that my path would cross with him quite often. And he does this thing where he greets you. It's hello, comrade. Even on one occasion, I was walking up Charing Cross Road and he was walking down the other side of the road and he shouted at me, and it kind of, it's like the warm glow of approbation. I completely get that. If you're going to a dinner party and you've got the choice between sitting next to Philip Hammond or Boris Johnson, you'd have to be mad. Even Mrs. Hammond, I imagine, would rather sit next to Boris Johnson. He's funny, he's erudite, he can be very charming, but he's a massive liar. And I suppose before Donald Trump became the president of America, we all laboured under the illusion that being a massive liar would somehow be an obstacle to high office. What's he up to now with his resurrection of that £350 million porky on the side of the bus in Friday's Daily Telegraph? He's trying to blame it all on the headline writers, but trust me, he's been on Fleet Street for long enough to know that any journalist will know that's bogus. He might just be able to pull the wool over the eyes of people outside the profession, but the idea that would have appeared on the front of the Daily Telegraph without him knowing every single punctuation mark of his proof copy is palpably absurd. So what's he up to? I just don't get it. Richard in Richmond does. Richard, what's he up to?
Well, who knows?
What? You can't do that.
I suppose one way to look at this is look at it in terms of internal Tory party leadership politics.
Yes, of course. But even then, it's a little bit opaque, to me at least. What do you think's going on?
Well, if we go back a couple of weeks, the press were full of Mogmentum and profiles of Jacob Rees-Mogg and so forth.
Yeah.
And if you think about this in terms of him competing with Amber Rudd as the successor for Theresa May, he may have felt that he was losing profile. And then you say losing profile with whom?
Yes.
And I suspect it's with the party members within the Tory party whose support he would need for any leadership bid. And what resonates best with those, a large majority of which are older people who voted for Brexit, and for whom the 350 million really resonates.
Yeah.
So he cuts through an awful lot of the noise and complexity about what's going on in Brussels and goes direct to that group with a very simple and clear message that he's still here, he's got a clear view on Brexit, and he says something that really resonates with one of the key things that led a lot of them to vote for Brexit.
Even though it's been established as as an untruth. I mean, the net figure is about £200 million a week lower than the 350 million, and the 350 million is contingent upon the trading conditions and success that we enjoy as a member of the world's biggest single market. So there's no guarantee that we'll even be in the game on that level after leaving.
Absolutely right. And if you look at the economic impact of a hard Brexit, you're looking at a hit to GDP of maybe £100 billion, and if per year, and that really impacts tax revenues by a multiple.
Of course it does, but we don't want to hear this. We need more positivity. Don't be so unpatriotic. What confuses me, though, under that analysis, is why he'd want to be in charge when reality begins to bite. Surely he'd be much happier back writing newspaper columns and presenting historical documentaries for the BBC about why we should be inviting Turkey into the European Union as soon as possible. That's not satire, by the way, for those who don't listen to the programme every day. That actually happened.
But I suppose ambition is blind, and if you don't get through the short term, there is no long term as a potential leader of the Tory party. So he's got to deal with these immediate issues, and he'll deal with the other stuff later, I guess, is as far as his thinking probably goes.
And so, literally, the glittering prize that is arguably more out of his reach now than it has been for quite a long time, the glittering prize is of such epic import that nothing else matters. Everything else pales into insignificance.
Well, yes, and if he doesn't do it now, he's never going to be able to do it in the future. So
never say never. I don't know that that's true anymore. I would have nodded along with that a couple of years ago, but now I think that, you know, if we elected a goat to high office in this country or in America, well, I suppose in America they have, but nothing should be. You can never say never. We could do anything. Anything can happen, you know, absolutely anything. And Johnson seems to be aware of that, but I can't... Jacob Rees-Mogg really is a viable rival for the leadership?
Well, for some people he clearly is. you've got to think about different groups of supporters and the things that appeal to them. And he's obviously got a lot of support.
And that is how the Tory elect their leaders. You need that grassroots support. And if anybody was sort of falling for Jacob Rees-Mogg's leadership credentials, it would be as you say, the older, perhaps, just let's say the older. I don't want to be rude.
It's people who speak Latin, basically, isn't it?
I don't know about that. It's people who go a little bit weak at the knees when somebody else speaks Latin. It's perhaps a slightly more specific constituency. So, thank you, Richard. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's a mark of how mad things have become, isn't it? That I could sit here now and list Boris Johnson's career calumnies, and you'd think that I was somehow embarked upon a character assassination. Journalism used to be about facts. Certainly when I came into this business, it was still largely about telling the truth. There were newspapers that had political allegiances, but certain facts were inviolate. Boris Johnson lost his first job in journalism for making up a quote that was from his own godfather, damaged his own godfather's career, actually. Many people think that it put paid to his godfather's chances of becoming Master of Balliol College at Oxford, and Boris Johnson wrote something in the Telegraph, in the Times, I beg your pardon, that was just not true. His godfather had never said it. Something to do with Piers Gaveston, the lover of Edward II, and the demolition of a castle, where Johnson quoted his godfather saying they might have canoodled, but the castle hadn't been there, or Gaveston was already dead. It's all very, esoteric, but that was a lie. I remember when I finally got my foot in the door on a national newspaper, if I'd been busted lying on a big story, I don't think my feet would have touched the ground. I think that would have been my last job in journalism, and I've told you a few times how desperate I was. Measuring inside legs for a living, how desperate I was to get into journalism after trying to sort of call in some of my late father's contacts, only to discover they were all dead or redundant, and then ended up getting into journalism after selling a suit to John Major and selling the story of selling the suit to the Daily Express. So if I'd been busted lying, I didn't have the background, I didn't have the connections, I didn't have the contacts to just bowl up a week later at the Daily Telegraph after being fired from the Times. And that's fine, that's journalism, that's posh people, that's the way it's always worked in this country. But then to lie and lie and lie again and again and again and again, and still have this momentum, it's quite bizarre to me. Why isn't it bizarre to you? What is his secret? 0345 6060 973. And what's he playing at now? This weird timing, this weird intervention, this weird exchange with the head of the UK Statistics Authority. Again, because not everyone is going to be honest with you anymore in this Brexit universe. The head of the UK Statistics Authority has a statutory responsibility. It's literally written in his job description that he has to protect the public from the misrepresentation or the manipulation of published data. So he is doing his duty when he interrupts his weekend to take the Foreign Secretary to task. But what's the Foreign Secretary playing at? I'm not sure I'm any clearer now than I was at 10 o'clock, which is an indication perhaps of how knotty this problem is, rather than the quality of my calls, which arguably provided much better insights than I've managed to. Let's keep that standard up after this. I suppose for a classicist it's somehow apt that everything looks so Roman now with regard to Boris Johnson. This is the sort of thing that you could expect a sort of playwright to get involved in, the internecine warfare. But I genuinely don't know what he's up to, which is not a very good position to be in professionally. I'm supposed to have strong views on everything. Increasingly, I don't. Increasingly, I just admit to befuddlement and confusion, but I'm going to have to gird my loins and reverse that process in the coming weeks, because you don't tune in to tell me what's going on in the world. You tune in to tell me what I've got wrong. So, on this one, I'm enduringly fascinated by the question of how Boris Johnson can lie and lie and lie again, lie about everything, lie to his employers, lie to his wives, lie to his party leader, lie to his readers, lie to the electorate, and lie and lie and lie again, and still some people lap it up. But the way I've just typified you means you're unlikely to ring me, doesn't it? And how can anybody enjoy being lied to on this level? I guess you could point at America and say, well, it's not unique to Britain. But the very first time I interviewed him, and I still voted for him after this, I remember saying to him, well, how can the voters of London trust you? given that you lied to Michael Howard when he was party leader, you lied to Conrad Black when he was the owner of The Spectator, you've lied to both of your wives, presumably you've lied to all of your mistresses, you certainly lied to the mother of your love child in Chelsea, although I can't remember whether he had that love child at the time of the interview, and he was almost offended. He was like, listen here, mate. And that mate was quite beautiful as well, because even that softens you up a bit as an interviewer. I don't know how deliberate it is and how much of it he was sort of born that way. But it is quite remarkable. We're not thick, as a general rule in this country. And, you know, Conservative voters generally have more likelihood of having been through tertiary education than others. It's a socio-economic fact. How come people still swallow it? I don't get it. And the slightly more timely question, of course, is what's he up to at the moment? What do you think he's playing at? Ian is in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say?
I think, well, if we split into two parts, I think one, what's Boris up to?
Yeah.
I think maybe one, he could be bored. I read somewhere that, the Foreign Office is perhaps one of the loneliest departments of government, so maybe he's...
Why do you say that? What do you mean?
Well, it's just something that I've read in the sense that maybe it's not as close to the Prime Minister as maybe defence or health and so on and so on. Okay. So there could be that element in it. Maybe he's bored. Maybe he wants to.
Did you know? I like that, the idea that he's bored. That's probably because well, I mean, in terms of Occam's razor, what else have we got? He's just bored. He's just literally throwing stuff out the window.
Yeah,
well, not literally.
I mean, Theresa May. She's in a difficult position because if she sacked him, he could be a troublesome figure on the backbenches. If she keeps him in his position, she's going to become under increasing pressure to agree with him. So I think that
But what does he represent? I mean, this is the interesting thing in the German media this morning is the idea that they can't quite believe that we're being dominated by a civil war in the Conservative Party when the government still doesn't have a strategy for the EU negotiations. Sadly, that's a matter of fact, not a matter of opinion, but they seem to misunderstand the Anglo-Saxon fascination with internecine warfare. Why? I just want to keep saying why, actually, until 1 o'clock, Ian, but I'm not sure that will win any awards.
I think part of it is also, the British love of the eccentric.
Yeah. Yeah, but that makes me think of Fred Dibner building chimneys. I don't want them to be Foreign Secretary making us a laughingstock around the world.
Neither do I. But this is the situation I think we're in. You see, if you remember Spitting Image, for example.
Yes.
At first, a lot of politicians didn't like Spitting Image because they thought, well, look how they're caricaturing me.
Yes.
My eyes aren't that close together, my nose isn't that big, and so on and so on. Later on, they actually grew to appreciate it because it got them known.
And if you didn't have a puppet, it was almost like a judgment on your relevance and importance.
Exactly, quite. And Boris Johnson is doing exactly that in human form.
He is like a human spitting image puppet. You're my favourite caller by some distance today. He's bored and he's a human spitting image puppet.
Well, pretty much so, because here's the thing. Most people probably couldn't identify more than half a dozen members of any current administration.
Yeah.
Now, along comes Boris Johnson, along comes Jacob Rees-Mogg. Oh, they can recognise them. They stand out. A lot of people, if they saw their MP walking down the street, they probably wouldn't know them.
No, and also I don't think Amber Rudd necessarily cuts through with the country, and she's the more serious rival for any future leadership bid, albeit that her constituency majority is tiny.
Yeah.
So he's bored and he's just sort of thinking, what can I do now? I haven't been on a front page for a while. I don't really know what's going on with Brexit. Nobody does. If things go south, I'm probably going to get lumbered with more blame than anybody else because I'm more front and centre than anybody else. So what have I got to lose by just setting off some fireworks?
Well, there we are. I mean, that's a good point. He hasn't got really anything to lose because, he's a very wealthy man, so he doesn't have to worry on that score. Theresa May, if she sacks him, he knows he can cause trouble for her.
Yeah.
It's like the old adage, it's better to have someone of questionable parentage urinating inside the canvas structure outwards than the other way around.
Yes, I guess there's some truth in that. And then we're left with the thing that I have to find a way professionally, this is my problem, not yours, of getting calls from people who fall into the category of not having seen through him. Because I wouldn't ring someone up to say, well, I'm a gullible mug, James, and I'd like to tell you why. But you can speculate, as I do, on how people, particularly traditional Conservative voters, who were supposed to care about probity and integrity and family values and all of the things that they claim the Labour Party doesn't possess, how can they continue to cheerlead for a fella who is pretty much a poster boy for deceit and adultery?
Well, can I make a bit of a confession here?
Yeah.
I made a mistake of thinking Boris Johnson was stupid. I used to think that.
Yeah.
But then I thought, you know what? No, I was wrong. He's not stupid. He's a well-educated man. He's not stupid. And I think the image he gives off, I think it's a crafted image, myself.
Yes, I do too. I think he ruffles his hair before he stands up in front of certain audiences, and I think I've seen evidence that he pretends not to know where he is if he thinks it will play well with the crowd. He's done it more than once. So, again, then in a way, we're back to that. I mean, it's a very Brexit-flavoured observation, is that he has a much better understanding of how gullible and stupid much of the electorate can be, and he plays to that gullibility and stupidity while buying into the notion that people who call it out and say don't be gullible and stupid, they're the ones who apparently are condescending and sneering. He gets that better than anybody in Britain, perhaps.
Yes.
I love that. And before you go, Leeds you've called from. That's a small town outside Pudsey, right?
Yes.
Coming up to 10.
Just outside Bradford.
Coming up to 10:59. Thank you, Ian. Let's squeeze in Dan, who's in the Wirral. Dan, what's going on?
Hi, James. Okay. To be honest, I think it's a rerun of the referendum again for his own gain.
But he won the last time.
No, but his aim in that, his role in that, was to become Prime Minister, because he honestly thought that was the next step for him. And I think he's arousing this spirit of the £350 million again to get the attention back on him.
Yeah.
Because it was used as a potent weapon. And I if there was one thing that I think swung that referendum, it was that £350 million.
Yeah, well, the fellow who came up with it, the advisor to Michael Gove previously, Dominic Cummings, has certainly agrees with you that was the defining factor. They needed immigration, but they could leave that to the kind of sort of toxically racist rhetoric of people like Farage. But you couldn't do the sensible people who held their nose when they got into bed with UKIP. You needed something big, and they gave them the bus.
Of course. So from the way I see it, Brexit's looking a bit downtrodden again. We're all sort of a bit all over the place. Maybe the people who wouldn't have voted for Brexit without the 350 are losing attention.
But then he's treating them like mugs because they have been given incontrovertible evidence that figure was nonsense. In fact, some of them have disowned it quicker than you can say, you know, Jimmy Riddle. Everyone's disowned that bus, and now he's attempted to get back in the driving seat of it.
But I think that's exactly why he's doing it.
Because he thinks that the public will be stupid enough to fall for it again, even though they've been queuing up to disown the bus ever since the referendum result came in. I think you might be onto something, Dan. With Brendan in Surrey, who's tweeted to say that our callers in that hour described Boris Johnson rather well. Perfectly, in fact, is Brendan's phrase. Well done all. I shall add my words of congratulation to all the callers in that hour. It wasn't very uplifting, and we didn't speak to anybody who still believes the hype. Don't, no, stop it. You're 45 years old. We didn't speak to anybody who still believes the hype. I have to find a way. I'll take your advice on this. I'll take your advice on most things. I have to find a way of somehow describing that kind of constituency, people who are believing the hype, if you will, without alienating them from ringing in. I seem to have lost that ability a bit recently, so do feel free to let me know. Maybe if you didn't call us stupid, James, we'd ring in and talk to you and prove how stupid we are. I've just done it again. There you go. There he is, popping up in our news bulletin. Have a listen to this and tell me what you make of his psychological state.
As for backseat driving, honestly, there's one driver in this car, to use Amber's metaphor, which he's quite often uses, and quite rightly. It's Theresa.
Still all one big game, isn't it? And yesterday, we spent the first hour of the programme. I have to say, I was in a bit of a state yesterday. I don't know if you noticed. We'll get onto it in a minute, actually, because we're about to talk about health issues. But my shoulder, I was in absolute agony. That you can tell, listening back, top of yesterday's programme, no energy, physical pain, grimacing. Possibly didn't inject the question about what Boris was up to with as much vim and vigour as I would have liked, but I solved it about 20 minutes after coming off air. He wants her to sack him. He absolutely wants her to sack him. I don't know if you've seen Dominic Cummings on Twitter. He was the head of the Vote Leave campaign, the fellow who came up with the 350 million quid on the side of the bus. He is doing that thing that I told you 11 days ago would be the next chapter of Brexit, where instead of promising you unicorns, they start arguing over whose fault it is that there won't be any unicorns. This is, I kid you not, you're probably not getting this because you're still like reading the Telegraph or the Mail or not reading anything at all. You rely on us for reality and truth, and between 10 and 1 you'll get it. So here's the thing, the head of the Vote Leave campaign describing David Davis's negotiating position as a complete shambles. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Then you've got there's another fella who is the editor of one of the pro-Leave websites using similar language to describe the mess that has been made. So that is going to be the next chapter. The next chapter of Brexit will be buck passing and blame. And if you want to understand Boris Johnson, and I've had the dubious pleasure of watching him very, very closely for most of my broadcasting career, because for over half of it he was Mayor of London. If you want to understand Boris Johnson, just list the circumstances in which he finds himself and ask yourself what you would do if all you cared about was you. So if your absolute raison d'etre was self-protection and self-promotion, in any given situation you are seeking to either minimise the damage that will be done to you as a consequence of your own actions or maximise the benefits that will be brought to you as a consequence of being in the right place at the right time. It's why he came out for leave. The whole plan was that they would not win the referendum, but he would have shored up the lifelong committed support of the wing of the Tory party that wanted to leave. So he couldn't lose, unless, of course, he won, which is why the expression on his face the morning after winning was not a million miles away from the way a rabbit looks when caught in the headlights of a car. So yesterday, wrestling and puzzling, why has he done this weird thing before Theresa May makes her speech? 1:20, if you follow me on Twitter, he is gagging to be sacked. He wants to be as far away as possible when the wheels come off, but he knows that resigning would look like desertion. So he is gagging to be sacked. The big question now is whether or not he gets his wish from Theresa May. And by an amazing coincidence, 10:20 last night, the political editor of The Sun reported an exclusive which saw Boris Johnson's, quotes, friends, end quotes, don't need me to translate that, telling The Sun that he believes the negotiations are going to be a disaster and that Theresa May is going to be humiliated. Just facts, just reports. I will now make it more patriotic by singing the first 3 verses of Land of Hope and Glory. No, I won't. I will instead bring something else to your attention from that other great musketeer of Brexit, Liam Fox's department. This is Department for International Trade. And they tweeted last night at 7:14 p.m. The provisions of CETA, this is the trade agreement between the European Union and Canada. The provisions of CETA will take effect from Thursday. Here's what it means for you. # great trade. Eliminate nearly all Canadian import duties. Increase opportunities for UK companies to bid for public contracts in Canada. Strengthen UK firms' access to Canadian services and investment markets. And another tweet, also at 7:14. It was like a hat trick of brilliant tweets about how good this trade agreement between the EU and Canada is going to be. The provisions of CETA will take effect from Thursday by boosting trade. CETA will create jobs and growth and new opportunities for UK business. And then still at 7:14, so they were all pinging out of the account of the Department for International Trade, presided over by Liam Fox. CETA is progressive. It goes beyond removing customs duties by taking people in the environment fully into account. At which point, presumably, somebody pointed out to whoever's in charge of the Twitter account that the fellow who heads up the Department for International Trade was one of the key campaigners for us to pull out of the European Union that has just signed a trade agreement with Canada. So they've deleted all 3 tweets. Luckily, my social media presence is such that people bring this stuff to my attention. The Department for International Trade. So if you're worried that the Department for the enactment of Brexit is looking a little bit incompetent or a complete shambles, according to the head of the Vote Leave campaign, David Davis has lost, 2 ministers, 1 special advisor and 1 chief negotiator. Okay. So that's not going great. So turn your attention instead to the Department of International Trade for the patriotic Rule Britannia analysis of the situation. And it turns out they're boasting about the impact of a trade deal struck by the European Union with the Canadian government. That's what they're actually boasting about on Twitter, until someone with a brain cell points out the idiocy of that position, and they delete the tweet, secure in the knowledge that none of the newspapers, still cheerleading from the sidelines as the bus heads towards the cliff edge, will bother picking up on it or reporting on it at all. But land of hope and glory. And do you know what? I missed a chance last week to have a little look at that speech from Jean-Claude Juncker. I suggested that he'd achieved something incredible by uniting Remainers and Leavers alike in the belief that he is a bit of a wally, Jean-Claude Juncker. And this employment of the phrase United States of Europe was like a red rag to a bull, wasn't it? So I've done what I always do. I've looked at the speech in translation. I've gone back to source and had a proper look at it. And I have to say, I think on this occasion, the Leavers are right. I think this is absolutely appalling and profoundly unpatriotic. This is what he actually had to say during that speech in the European Parliament last week. He said, all the while, there is a remedy which, if it were generally and spontaneously adopted by the great majority of people in many lands, would, as if by a miracle, transform the whole scene and would in a few years make all Europe, or the greater part of it, as free and as happy as Switzerland was in 1948. What's he talking about? He goes on, what is this sovereign remedy? It's like he's trolling us using the word sovereign. Jean-Claude Juncker, eh? What is this sovereign remedy? It is to recreate the European family, or as much of it as we can, and to provide it with a structure under which it can dwell in peace, in safety, and in freedom. Who does he think he is? We must build a kind of United States of Europe. In this way, only will hundreds of millions of toilers be able to regain the simple joys and hopes which make life worth living. The process is simple. All that is needed is the resolve of hundreds of millions of men and women to do right instead of wrong, and to gain as their reward blessing instead of cursing. What is he? What? Shut up. Oh, I'm sorry. That wasn't Jean-Claude Juncker. That was some Ramona snowflake called Winston Churchill speaking in 1948 about the United States of Europe. And you won't be reading that in the Daily Mail anytime soon either. Joined in the studio by one of the most intriguing and perhaps controversial figures of recent British politics. Alastair Campbell, spin doctor to Tony Blair, of course, and prior to that, political editor of the Daily Mirror. But now, it's fair to say, a sort of diarist of some repute. I mean that, because there's some people write diaries as a kind of just a sort of a way to smuggle in self-promotion and self-aggrandizement, not mentioning any names, Piers Morgan. And some people write diaries because they were very close to really important events, and you feel almost a sense of duty to provide that perspective?
I don't know about duty, but I did them, I'd say, as therapy, and I still do them a little bit as therapy. It's like every day you kind of just dump down the stuff that's still in your head by the end of the day. And I do think that as they're there, and as I was so close to Tony and to Gordon and to all the other kind of big figures in that period, duty overstates it, but I do think it's important that history is based on accounts of people who are analysing who was there, but also the people who were there, and it's also I'm big on visualisation, and I like the idea. So this one is like volume 6, and it's pretty big.
It's a chunk.
And and if I keep going, I quite like the idea of my grandchildren when I have them, and their children. That somewhere on a bookshelf, and if we still have books in the future,
sure,
that there'll be a slab of books up there, and they can sort of dip in and out and see what we got up to.
Posterity. When did you first sort of conceive publication? Because we're up to volume 6 now. When you were writing volume 1, was there a little voice in the back of your head saying, when the dust has settled, maybe I'll publish these? Because they read, you've always been very honest, especially sort of post your problems with alcohol, like a lot of people who've been through that you have to talk about it, you have to confront yourself. Yeah. Did you always intend to publish?
No, I didn't actually, and in fact, when I published the first volume, Jonathan Powell, who was Tony's chief of staff, and he said nobody could accuse you of writing a self-serving memoir because you come over as a total lunatic.
Which is why it's a good read for people who...
I think I do a bit. So, but I guess there was a part, and certainly now we're into this period, because actually what's funny about this is that this is 2005 to 2007. So towards the end of this, I'm actually agonising about whether to do the first volume.
Of course.
And sort of whether I can do stuff that might damage Gordon and dealing with the Cabinet Office and the spooks and all the rest of it. So it's almost like a kind of, there's the camera on. Oh, it's gone off again. I was going to hold it like that for the camera because I know you're multimedia now.
Yes, we are.
But so I don't know really. I just it is a habit, and I'm glad they're out there. I don't, the first one sold massively.
Yes.
That was kind of extracts, and then these do nicely, but actually I think it's just I like having them out there. I find the process quite balls aching, if I can say that.
Apologies to anyone who's.
I'm not allowed to say balls aching.
You don't have to repeat. You don't have to compound the problem. Honestly.
So, but I like having them out there.
Yes.
And the other thing is, I don't know about you. I have a really bad memory. So actually, having something, there's stuff in here that I don't actually remember.
But because you wrote it down at the time.
But because I wrote it down, I can think about it.
Well, that's it then, isn't it? I mean, because the first volume was revelatory. I mean, it was close to the edge, journalistic kind of revelation. Whereas now you're writing history books.
Yeah,
just from the perspective of a ringside seat, or in fact, actually, the passenger seat.
I mean, I left Number 10 in 2003, but this one's called From Blair to Brown because it's about that transition, and I was central to that because Tony obviously was very close to Tony, and I was about the only person in Tony's entourage that Gordon was still talking to.
See, there's no exaggeration there for people who haven't read the books. The notion of, I mean, the phrase "there was no love lost between the two" is wholly inadequate.
At times it was grim, to be honest. It really was, and I wish it hadn't been like that, but at times it was. And I think Tony was, probably more sinned against than sinning. I think he was. But I do think that if we'd have all hung together, I think we could have lasted a lot longer than we did. And that being said, Tony was Prime Minister for 10 years, Gordon was Prime Minister for 3 years after that.
But you think you could have won in 2010 if there'd been a proper semblance of unity at the top of the party?
I think we could have beaten Cameron. I don't think David Cameron came along with a better set of ideas for the country.
No, but, I mean, look at the amazing service he's provided to the nation in the intervening.
I was making a speech about that this morning.
Well, I mean, what's going on, Alastair Campbell, in the context of Western politics at the moment? And
that was exactly what I was talking about. This title of this.
I'm not writing you a six-figure check or whatever.
What the hell is going on?
Yes, what is going on?
It's grim. I think that Trump and Brexit are indications of politics in crisis and countries in decline. That's what I think. I think that and there's a real danger. I think the non-democracies are operating at considerable advantage to us. And I think the Brexit thing is, I know your views and they're very similar to my own. I do feel it's a catastrophe. And that's not because I'm a Remoaner, it's because I actually have got kids. I worry about what the country's becoming. And, this thing this morning, there was somebody who said to me, look, but OK, I voted Remain as well, but surely you have to accept that when there's been a vote. And I said, well, you have to accept there's been a vote.
Yes.
What you don't have to accept, and I certainly don't, is that democracy is a moment in time. It's a process. And I think there is so much stuff coming out now that we didn't know. There's so much, and the incompetence of this government is just mind-blowing. I mean, OK, you read the diaries. We had our moments when things didn't go exactly according to plan. But this lot, they can't spend 5 minutes in the room with each other without spewing out their differences all over the media. And the French and the Germans and the Europeans are looking at this and thinking, well, this is not a serious country anymore. So I worry we're in decline. I think about, people go on about freedom of movement, and I understand worries about immigration, but there's also freedom of movement the other way. We are stopping our kids from going out into the world and making something of themselves around the world. We are turning on ourselves, and anyway.
Do you think that part of the problem at Downing Street is that they haven't got you, an Alastair Campbell, because your reputation was was pretty serious. I mean, you would Malcolm Tucker, of course, was famously modelled upon your control freakery. Some would say, or just astonishing attention to detail. Others would say there doesn't appear to be anybody who's got that firmness of a grip on the tiller.
No,
and I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment.
No, okay, thank you. Yeah, you were getting far too warm there.
Yeah, exactly.
My daughter did say to me, she said to me, she said, "Dad, is Malcolm Tucker really based on you?"
Yeah.
And I thought she was going to say, something. She said, "Because if it is, I'm so proud of you."
Oh, really? Not embarrassed. That's a result, isn't it? That's pretty good.
But I think look, in the end, it's down to the leaders. So I always thought the thing was with me was overblown. I was there because Tony Blair asked me to do a job for him, and I did that job, and I did the job, as this book shows, after I left as well. And I'm still close to Tony, and I still, will fight for him and argue for him. But I think that what I do feel is that Theresa May doesn't really know what she's trying to do. It isn't clear. I mean, okay, Brexit means Brexit.
And Boris is Boris.
And Boris is Boris. She's sort of... And look, if you're being fair to her, she became Prime Minister on the back of Brexit, on the back of referendum. Cameron went, she came in. She probably does feel quite a profound sense of duty to deliver it. But the scandal for me is that from day one, she having been part of the 48%, she completely stuck two fingers up to the 48%.
And has never accounted for why. You've never had the explanation.
She's made no effort to bring the country together behind a plan. And that's why I just refuse to. I bump into people that say, you should be getting behind this, and you should be using your skills to help the government. No, I'm not going to help the government do something I think is completely wrong.
But that's because you haven't accepted the inevitability of it yet.
Well, I don't accept the inevitability
Clearly.
of it. Because it's highly likely that it's going to happen. But I think as we go through this next phase, I think the cost is becoming clearer. I think the chaos of our government is becoming clearer. I think the consequences are becoming clearer. There is no route map. Now, the problem is there's no route map either to what's going to happen or to how you stop it.
Sure.
But I think in this period, we will see whether there is an appetite to go back on this. And I just think that the public will at least think we should keep an open mind for a while till we see.
Do you think the argument should be left to the Leavers now? So today you have the remarkable sight of Dominic Cummings, who was a director of Vote Leave, describing David Davis in circumstances that most Remainers are far too polite to employ. Yeah. So I mean, the phrase "ferrets in a sack" springs to mind.
But listen, she is now the 7th Tory leader to be getting torn apart on the issue. David Cameron had this referendum in part because he wanted to lance the boil of Europe in the Tory party.
What did you think? Because this isn't in the book. It happened sort of several years subsequently. What did you think when it became clear that he was going to push ahead with that?
Terrible mistake, because I think that...
Well, that's anti-democratic, isn't it? You're opposed to the will of the people?
No, because I think democracy should be about how the country comes together to make the big decisions for the future. And what always happens in with referendums is that they get announced. People think, well, that's giving the people the final say, that's right. Sometimes it is. I think for specific things, like I don't think we could have done the Good Friday Agreement without the referendum of the people in Northern Ireland. I don't think we could have done the Scottish Parliament without Scottish people saying that they wanted it in a specific referendum. But this was to say we are handing over responsibility for the biggest decision that we're ever going to have to take in our lifetime. And he didn't do it out of a strategic purpose for the country. He did it as a tactic to get rid of UKIP during the 2015 election. And it's scandalous, and he's just wandered off now. And what's interesting about one of the things that I talked about not having a memory in this book, that actually was, I was surprised how often I kept bumping into Osborne and Cameron during this period, just at events.
He'd just become leader, hadn't he? Or that sort of...
He became leader during this period, but it was very interesting how Osborne in particular, very open and frank with me about what their strategy was going to be. And part of it was, we want Blair out, we want Gordon in because we think we'll have a better chance against him. And on Europe, they were basically managing it all the time. I don't think they ever really led on it, they managed it. Now maybe we did a bit of that as well.
But no actual vision, just damage limitation.
Yeah. And
do you like Osborne?
I don't like Osborne. I don't like Osborne. I think he's a genuinely interesting character. And I'm not one of these people who, hates people because they're Tories.
No, I know. That comes across in the diary.
Yeah, I like interesting people. I think he's a very, very interesting bloke. I thought a lot of the stuff he did as Chancellor was wrong-headed. I thought the austerity thing was I think they exploited the crash and its consequences, to do stuff that the right wing in Britain wants to do anyway. And I think it's part of the struggle I've had since I left 14 years ago is actually trying to adapt to a different sort of life. And he's going to have to do that now as well. And I think he's doing it in quite an interesting way.
You're enjoying the Standard?
They gave me and my missus 2 pages yesterday to waffle on about stuff. So,
we didn't waffle on. It was quite moving, actually. We'll mention that after this. It's 12:47. You're listening to James O'Brien, joined until 1 o'clock by Alastair Campbell. Another 8 or 9 minutes with Alastair Campbell to mark the publication of the 6th volume of his diaries. It covers the period 2005 to 2007. You mentioned that you're still obviously in touch with Tony Blair, and this is the period where you could argue the legacy began to unravel a bit, because the post-Iraq, post-WMD, post-dossier, I think Jeremy Vine's just published a memoir, hasn't he, in which he says that when he opens up his phone lines, anything to do with Tony Blair, the queue of people just waiting to port or jaw. Obviously, we have a more sophisticated switchboard and a higher quality of caller, so we get a slightly more nuanced conversation. But it is, I mean, it's not pretty, the reputational damage that he's currently carrying.
Yeah, I think...
And you, to an extent.
Yeah, funny enough, I think I have... I don't know why. I feel that the mood around me has gone in the opposite direction. I think, in a way, I used to get a lot of the stuff when he was in power.
Right.
I think I was a bit of a lightning conductor for that. And then since then, of course, I've done other stuff and I've branched out a bit on my own. And I think the two things, really. One is Iraq, as you say. I think there's a kind of lasting thing around that. And I think that for a lot of people, they won't and they don't want to see beyond that. And even if you try to say to them, yeah, but okay, even if you accept that Iraq was bad, and I'm not saying it was, I'm saying even if you accept that...
Why won't you say that it was?
Because I was alongside him when he made the decision, and what I can't stand is the way that people have made it all about, he lied, we lied. He just made a very, very difficult decision, and the consequences he will live with. And there've been, and also the simplicity, the way that people want to say he did Iraq and now we have ISIS. It's like 2 + 2 = whatever. And I think the other thing I'd say about Tony that I think did damage him, this book ends with him handing over to Gordon. And if you remember, Tony left to a standing ovation from the House of Commons. Yes. He was seen as one of the great prime ministers, and the Cameron and Osborne in the book, they talk about him as the master and what would he think and what would he do, and Tony this and Tony that. Now, he then vacated the field. He was very conscious of how Thatcher used to undermine Major, even if she didn't mean to. He vacated the field for 3 years. During that time, a lot of the right wing, media and politics, and a lot of the left wing, basically just between them constantly at him, battering his reputation. And then I think the money thing, I think Tony perceived to be making a lot of money.
Yes.
Now actually...
Well, he is. He was.
He is making a lot of money, but people never hear about what he does with it. For example, employ 250 people. For example, running lots of governance projects in Africa for which he's funding. So he's actually out there fundraising. So when they'll read a headline saying that he got paid X by JP Morgan to do Y, what they don't then get is what he's doing with that. He's building an organisation. It's what
you're doing what you always do. He is doing all of those things, but he's also living the life of an exceptionally wealthy plutocrat.
Well, he's a former prime minister.
Well, but he's living in considerably more gilded circumstances than John Major ever would.
Oh, you see, I wouldn't buy that.
Okay.
I think I'm not criticising John Major. I think John Major has a very good life.
Yes, but
he's been on the board of the Carlyle Group. He makes big speeches the same as Tony did. I think we get judged left and right by different standards.
Possibly.
I think the spouses get judged by different standards. I think that... So all I'm saying is that I think you get one side of the story if you get it through the Mail, the Telegraph, the Sun. The papers that don't like Tony really don't like him. Now, with me, they might... the Mail have the pop every few days, and I saw a hilarious one recently where Richard Littlejohn was writing a whole piece about me wearing a kilt, which was it was actually quite funny, but it was like, they feel they have to have a go the whole time. And I think what it is that, as I say, he left in this period to a standing ovation of his peers.
Yes.
Nobody got near him during that 10 years, apart from Gordon, actually. The Tories never got near him, never laid a glove on him, really.
Right.
And a lot of the media feel we never got him when he was there. We've got to keep trying to get him.
And that was exacerbated by him choosing to quit the field and stay in the background so they could just swing at him without any...
totally being defined by his enemies. And I think that was a mistake. I think he accepts that was a mistake.
Did you tell him at the time it was a mistake?
I said to him I did say at the time, I think you've got to stay engaged. Like Bill Clinton never stopped being engaged in the political debate. You have to do that, in my view.
Although it hasn't necessarily served American politics.
No, it hasn't, and they're in the mess as well. But I think that, and for Tony, I think now he's getting more engaged in the debate. But of course, as you say, I mean, I came on the LBC when Tony did his intervention recently about immigration, and Nigel Farage was where you were sitting, and I actually was on my way up to see Burnley, and I pulled in off the motorway to take a call from him because I wanted to defend Tony and his right to intervene in this debate. And people have got to move beyond shoot the messenger. Listen to what people say. And one of the problems I think we've got with the modern world and the modern media and the whole kind of fact that, the algorithms and big data, they're pointing us all the time to the stuff that we already believe. And we've actually got to listen to each other a bit more. And so I think Tony's got... I like the guy. He's incredibly experienced.
How often do you speak?
Fairly regularly.
What, daily?
No.
Weekly?
No. Weekly, at least, yeah.
Yeah? Catch up. Still run stuff by you?
Yeah, might do. Yeah, every now and then. Not always, but yeah.
And so the next volume is when you're out of politics completely?
No, I don't think I've ever been out. But no, because I went back to help Gordon.
Of course, yes.
I did. I went back for that
How's
election.
he going on?
I don't see Gordon speak to him nearly as much as I do Tony, but I think Gordon's another one who's busy around the world, and I think it's very hard for these guys. I mean, look at Cameron and Obama, just left office. They're still young, relatively. I've been out of Downing Street now for 14 years, and I'm 60.
Gosh, yes.
Right? So I've still got a bit left.
Yeah.
They've got a lot left, and you want to do things. But I think the other thing, we've got to stop sort of treating these people like they're kind of lepers, We've got to get... Why have we got such bad leadership in this country at the moment? In part because so few people even think about going
into politics. People are terrified of going into politics because of the coating that they'll get if, for example, Paul Dacre decides that he doesn't like them.
Well, Paul Dacre, as I know to my experience, if you do what everybody should do with bullies, you stand up to them, they do you no harm whatsoever.
Well, how did you stand up to him?
To Dacre?
Yeah.
I've stood up to Dacre for years. I strongly recommend you read my seminal piece in GQ last year about Dacre. I'm just not scared of anything they say.
I did read it.
I don't care about what they think of me.
Because you are ploughing your own furrow career-wise, you're financially secure.
Yeah, maybe.
That
maybe
helps.
A bit of that.
I got my first kicking from the Mail earlier this year, and I was all right with it because this is my main job. So the fact that I was doing some work at the BBC at the time didn't matter. But if that was my only job, I don't know that if I'd buckled under that pressure, it would have made me a bad person. Well,
that would be bad if you did, and I can see why some people might. All I'm saying is that I think you have to recognise a paper like the Mail for what it is: nasty, far right, and edited by a sociopath.
But with some great people on the staff who both of us probably call friends. One or two.
I think you've got to be careful about it. I think if you take the shilling, I think it's okay, one or two maybe.
And that concludes. We've barely scratched the surface. The latest volume of the diaries from Blair to Brown, 2005 to 2007, is out now in hardback. And I'll leave you with Lord Alex Carlyle's comment that Alastair Campbell's diaries have the quality of peeps. Can't ask for more than that.
You meant Samuel as opposed to
John. That's it from me for another day.